Walk the Talk America presents Guns and Mental Health, a podcast for firearms owners, clinicians, and the curious public.
Welcome back, listening audience. Today is Friday, April 11th. You are now on the Walk the Talk America Guns and Mental Health podcast. Today I'm joined by my co-host, Kevin Berry. How you doing, Kevin?
Good to be here again.
And we have a special guest today. I think some of the listeners are going to have some questions for you, Scott, but I know you can handle them. Scot Thomasson from Safe Gun Lock. Why don't you run down your bio real fast, and then we'll jump into what Safe Gun Lock actually is, because it's an intriguing product.
Sure. Well, I spent about 26 years in federal law enforcement. I spent 21 of those years working for ATF and
ATF.
then,
Oh no.
yeah. running high. and then I ended up going to work for the gun industry for about the past 10 years, splitting my time between the gun industry and working violent crime initiatives and strategies for various police departments, sheriff's offices around the country, and trying to help them reduce their violent crime and solve their unique issues.
Yeah, and reading your bio, you were pretty decorated. So you've seen some stuff.
I've seen some stuff, yeah.
That's one way to put it, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know what people don't realize is that what makes ATF very unique is the amount of stuff you see during a career. I think people are always shocked to realize that ATF agents are in more shootings on an annual basis than all other federal agencies combined. There have been more agents killed in the line of duty than all other agencies combined, uh, except if you go to the U.S. Marshals and get back into the cowboy days of 1870, 1880, maybe, but in modern law enforcement. Every day it's because everybody we're dealing with is a gun or a bomb and is a violent person, and that's where the agency that the state and local police often call when things get out of hand and they're too much for them to handle.
So how did you make the transition? Because we'll circle back to the ATF stuff in those days, but I want to know how you made the transition into where you're at now. Like you said, I went from being an ATF agent to working in the firearms industry, and now what you're doing with Safe Gun Lock, right? Like how does that transition happen? How do you end up where you're at now?
Well, it's actually while on its face would seem pretty unusual, but it's actually a natural progression. Most ATF agents are gun guys, or sportsmen, or firearms enthusiasts. Contrary to a lot of belief out there, and most gun owners that we deal with are really responsible people who are like-minded. Moving from ATF into the gun industry was pretty normal. I retired as chief of firearms operations for the whole agency. So the inspectors and the inspections and the investigations all fell underneath me. And I had a lot of great contacts in the gun industry. So I moved directly into that. Part of this also is that we've been facing a huge issue in this country with mental health, and then the access to firearms, and then when those two kind of come together, it becomes a big issue. So it was kind of a natural progression into dealing with that topic also, because it all comes down to responsible gun ownership, and responsible gun ownership is locking your firearm up. And so it was just a natural progression.
So do you come across a company like Safe Gun Lock and say like, "Oh, that's intriguing. That's an interesting way to secure your firearm," or do they reach out to you because of your expertise and your history?
Well, they reached out to me actually, and asked me to the founder of Safe Gun Lock is a really interesting guy. And he wanted to know what I thought. I've been watching this product since its prototype, and looking at it. And then when he finally went into production, I have to say it really kind of captured my attention because it's so unique. It is probably the best portable gun lock on the market. And I don't say that lightly. I've had every gun lock known to man, owned them, used them, but this is so unique and so different and so innovative. And it allows you to do things that other gun locks don't allow you to do.
It's interesting. So where's the company headquartered? What's its history? Like, how's the trajectory going?
Yeah, so it's been around for about a year and a half now. It's headquartered out of Washington D.C. That's where the founder is. Um, they've started working a lot on the mental health side, a lot with the military and a lot with veterans groups. They have a partnership with the Purple Heart Foundation, where every gun lock purchased is there's a donation made to the Purple Heart Foundation. And then they've been working with various military groups to try to work with their Office of Suicide Prevention and trying to provide a better gun lock to service members who might be in crisis or struggling a little bit. And in doing so, might help that service member get over the issues that they're currently dealing with.
Yeah, I think that in society today, and it's a positive thing. I think we're seeing companies that make locking devices really tap into this is something that can be used during a time of mental health crisis, right? Like there's multi use for all of these locks, right? So whether it's to keep unauthorized access or, keep people away that shouldn't have access to firearms. That's not the sole purpose anymore. Like companies are becoming a little bit more creative in the way that they're thinking to say like, okay, this could be used for XYZ, not just unauthorized access. And unauthorized access is a huge one, right? But there are other ways to use these locks. And I think it's really cool that people are starting to think about like, hey, in a time when someone has suicidal ideation in the house, maybe this is an extra layer of protection that you need to put on this while it's inside a safe, that type of thing. Yeah, I kind of love that it's moving towards that. And do you feel like the company was always focused, like they always understood that, or is that something that just kind of?
Yeah, no, I think they've always kind of started out that way and always thought that way. This company was centered around, making sure that those who possess guns, don't allow for a child to get a hold of it or somebody who happens to be in mental crisis get a hold of it. Listen, one of the big reasons a lot of people, they say, well, the safest way to lock up my gun is to put it in a safe. Okay, that's great. But then they say, but I got to have one or two out there because, in case I need it. And so one of the great deterrents for using a lock has been, well, if I need to get it in a hurry, I can't. It's a problem. And so what happens is everybody is so used to the old cable lock here, right? And so what you do is they say, well, why would I use a gun lock? Because to use a cable lock, I have to have a key. I have to figure out where my key is because it's not going to be in the same place with the lock. And I have to have a gun that's completely unloaded because the cable lock goes through the magazine well. And so now in the middle of the night, I have to go find the key, get the key in here, undo the key, get the key out, and then I got to go find a magazine and load a magazine in. And then what people also don't realize is as this cable is running in and out of the magazine well, what happens is you run the risk of damaging the ejector. And the ejector is a little piece of metal which is designed to take force on the end, but not force this way. And if you start bending that in any way, shape, or form, it'll actually destroy the functionality of the firearm. So with that in mind, what happened was the inventor of Safe Gun Lock created a lock that you don't need a key. It goes into the barrel of the gun and then it locks into the breech. And you have these dials, which are very tactile. You can operate them in the day or the night. And what happens is it basically goes into the barrel of the gun and then it locks forward. Let me let the slide go forward. So it goes forward. So now it's locked into the gun. So in the middle of the night, if I need it, I basically, set the combination, pull it out, and I'm ready to go. The big difference being is I can keep a fully loaded magazine in the magazine well, completely engage the lock, and it's good to go. So now all I have to do is move one of the dials, pull the combination out, and then rack the gun, and I'm set to go. So this takes away the excuse of, well, if I need my gun, it's inaccessible in a time of need. Well, you can get this gun unlocked in about 2 seconds.
And that's one of the things that we always say here. It's a campaign that we run. We like to say, train is hard, retrieving your firearm from its storage device or its safety lock as you do training with your firearm, right? So
Right.
if you train practicing the dial, however you have it set, over and over again, it's just going to become like second nature. And really, there's no excuse. You're becoming an expert at that, just like I am with all of. Yep, exactly. Like with every one of my devices, I can get to my firearm like that. I can do it in the dark, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And we've actually timed it, and I've been able to zero out everything and set the combination and get it off in about 3-4 seconds. You can actually, set your combination on two numbers and then just set the other two numbers, move it to where it needs to, and get it down to about, a second and a half. But like I said, there's no biometrics, so there's no battery to go dead. There's no key. It locks into the breech, which allows you to keep a loaded magazine. And like you said, train with it. And if you have kids in the house, the other nice thing is this, and I know whenever you have somebody, especially a military person or law enforcement, first responder, but goes for both. And the family members are the ones who often see them in crisis first, before the actual individual realizes wheels are starting to get a little wobbly. And to come in and then take that firearm away from that individual and get it out of the house, does something to that individual. They realize, oh my gosh, I can't be trusted anymore. They don't even trust me not to hurt myself or whatnot. This device can actually be put on by a family member, lock the gun up, and it's like a Denver boot for a vehicle. It completely enables the gun to be safe. And we've actually seen where individuals will say, okay, locking up the gun's good. I get to leave it in the house. Good. It's all, until this crisis passes. So there's an added advantage of supporting the person who's struggling.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing too. And I think you're right. I think a lot of especially outsiders outside of the 2A culture, people like behavioral health that may not be into firearms or may even be anti-gun, right? Like they don't understand the importance of the firearm, what it symbolizes to that service member, that person who went overseas and that firearm became part of their identity. And that's all they know. And now you're like, okay, you're not doing so well, so we're going to take that away from you. And that's never a good place, I think, for any firearms owner to be. Now, some will voluntarily say, get them out of the house right now, right? I'm not in a good way. But I think it needs to be left up to that owner. And I love coming up with these, okay, so, you're in a bad way. You don't want to be away from your firearm. Maybe we can come to some compromise here where the firearm stays. Let's put one of these locks on it. And I think it's a good idea. A little background around the company, like what's the history of the company? How long have you been at it?
Yeah, the companies they've actually been in existence for several years. They have gone to great lengths to design this. I'm looking at a prototype on my desk here, but it has gone through several evolutions. One of the big things that was very imperative for the founder was to ensure that these things were not defeatable by by anybody. So he's actually sent these out to various, like the lockpicking lawyer and some of these other sites that like to hype on picking locks and whatnot. And then they went back to the drawing board and re-engineered it and whatnot. These things are heavy. They're made out of steel. There's nothing plastic about it. It's actually very durable. It's expensive, but you know what? Anything that's worth it is expensive. And the company
What are we
is
looking at though for price, the MSRP?
$150 is the price of the lock. Now, what's interesting is several states have recently started started giving rebates for gun locks. Virginia's one of them. They'll give you up to $300 per gun lock, or $300 towards gun locks. So they implemented a plan where you get two for 350 if you're a Virginia resident. Louisiana has a similar law. They just passed another one, I think, in I want to say Kentucky or something like that, where they passed a lock your gun up type of law. Um, but it's a great company. It's a small company, and they're trying to do everything possible to try to just address mental wellness, or mental wellness, mental illness with the use of firearms and prevent that from happening, and also get keeping guns out of kids' hands, children's hands.
Yeah, that's a discussion that we have here regularly at Walk the Talk America, right? Is like legislation that makes sense uh, to keep gun owners safe and healthy. And I think the narrative of common sense is always has been kind of hijacked by anti-gun crowds. But one of the things that I think we can take that back as the firearms industry, because there is legislation out there that does sort of make sense. Like, to me, I'd love for all 50 states to have rebates for people to get locking devices to promote responsible storage and mental health and suicide awareness. I'd love for gun shops that carry these products, that carry these messages inside of the gun shops, that say, hey, bring your guns here in a time of crisis. I would love for them to get discounts on their insurance rates, for their business insurance. Like, I think there are
Right.
things that we not all legislation has to be evil and restrictive. It can be positive, and I think we just got to look at the creative side of that and come to the table and talk to politicians about, this is not a bad idea. Because, as you know, Scott, like, buying a firearm is not cheap, right?
No.
You got to buy the firearm itself, so you're in there for minimum 200 to $300. I'd say, you get some
Easily,
used guns.
easily.
Yeah, you got your ammo, you got how you want to holster the thing. Um, I think safety is always going to go last in a lot of people's minds, which is a shame.
Yeah, it is. I agree it is. And what's interesting is it's an afterthought. Safety's the afterthought, right? Over the past 10 years, I've advised, consulted with various groups around the country that are trying to tackle this firearms mental health issue. They do studies, they do research, they push out best practices, and what it always comes down to is, let's do a survey and let's lock up the gun into a safe, and let's basically 100% restrict access, and those are viable things, but they're just not realistic is the problem, because people who are having some struggles mentally, aren't making really good decisions, and that applies to the firearms itself. And why not have something that can help them lock it up? I mean, um, a pair of pliers will cut this in half. So why not go with the quality product that will actually lock the gun up, protect that individual and or his family? And I think the big key here is going to be the insurance industry, right? I think if the insurance industry starts pushing and saying, hey, if you're going to have a gun in your house, we'll give you a deduction on your insurance if you keep it locked up, or if you have these approved locking devices and are utilizing them. And it's kind of like a seatbelt, right? Or the safe driver. If if you're a safe driver, or you're constantly using a seatbelt, or your car has an airbag, we're going to give you a discount on your insurance. So,
Yeah.
but right now the states are trying to go that way, but it's always better. Listen, I think this is going to shock people, but I think if industry can get in there and kind of self govern and do the right sensible things and keep the government from actually regulating and imposing those types of things, it's better off for everybody anyway.
I agree, and I think a lot of people probably fell out of their chair. They're like, "Oh, an ATF agent has the same thought process as the rest, an ex-ATF agent,"
I
But
know, it's crazy.
right, but so like, and
Yeah.
that's the thing. I think, and I agree with you because my whole thing is because I know what some listeners just said, right? Like, I would never let an insurance company know that I have firearms because there's another list, right? But it's like, okay, listen, you believe it or not are a small minority of gun owners that have that like super pro 2A thought process. I would say the majority, the masses, because as somebody who owned a business, I knew that I couldn't just focus on what I would say the people that I saw at every SHOT Show or NRA show, right? The majority of our customers when I owned Eagle Imports were first time gun buyers.
Mhm.
When they call that office, we don't know where they stand politically. We don't know how they feel about the Second Amendment. A lot of people buy a firearm and say, well, I live in a horrible neighborhood and I just need something in my house. And
Right.
this seems like a good option. I want something that has a lot of safeties, right? Like, and so that's
Mhm.
the same person that would say, I would love a little bit of a discount on my insurance. I have no problem opting into that program, right? And that's where we
Mhm.
have to have people thinking. Um, Not everybody thinks like you. Not everyone is paranoid. Mr. Guy who will not, get an insurance break for owning a gun, but will be on Instagram showing that they bought a new gun, which makes no sense to me. It's like if you want to go off the grid, you got to go off the grid, man.
Yeah.
But
So they'll have all that on Instagram. They'll have stickers all over, saying "out of my cold dead hands" or NRA life member. I mean, they basically advertise to everybody. And oh yeah, by the way, when somebody breaks into their house and they're not home and steals their guns, they're going to put an insurance claim in to try to get that covered under their homeowner's insurance.
exactly.
So yeah, I get you.
We just
Yeah.
have to think around any potential consequences of it. Like Mike, you've had a lot of great conversations where you try to incentivize like temporary storage with FFLs, and then the FFLs will report be like, oh yeah, the insurance was there, but then they wanted to jack my other side of my insurance up because I have more inventory. So as long as it's a true discount, not oh you get a little discount there, but oh you're a firearm owner and a higher risk of suicide because of XYZ data, and it counteracts and maybe increases your rate. It's the only potential way. I'm all for incentivizing it. I just don't want it to be flipped and used against gun owners.
So what it's interesting what the state of Virginia does is the state of Virginia um, set aside $5 million every year, and they say anybody who's a resident of the state of Virginia wants to will give everybody a dollar for dollar state tax credit for a gun lock up to $300. If you can get 5 or 10 or whatever, but up to $300. And but this is where it gets a little wonky. It has to go through an FFL. So what Safe Gun Lock did was it teamed up with an FFL and then says, look, if you're a Virginia resident, you place your order through them. They give you a letter, and then the letter is actually you submit it with your taxes, and you get $1 for $1, $300 off on a tax credit. And that's not a bad way. That's not a bad way of doing it. I don't believe that Virginia's ever, burned through their $5 million, because it goes back into the general fund if they don't use it all, but I don't think they ever had. But there has to be a way of incentivizing, because Michael, you're right. It's like the afterthought. Listen, the number one growing sector in the gun community today is actually women, and they're minority women. They're women who live and are raising families in bad neighborhoods, and they want some protection. And so when I speak to, I still have a bunch of clients that are in the gun industry, licensees, federal firearms licensees, and I still tell them, I said, man, you have a great opportunity when a lady comes in, a young lady comes in, or an older woman comes in, never touched a gun in her life, wants to buy one. Take the opportunity to give her some training, make sure she has the right safety equipment, make sure she has the right locks, the right ear, and encourage her to go shoot. You don't want her just to buy it and then stick it in her nightstand and never have fired the darn thing. There has to be this, let's bring all these people in and kind of show them the right way to utilize these things. And here's
Yeah,
the
I'm going to
legislative
share.
sector.
I'm going to share a story that's was really funny. So when I first started in this industry, I was basically a field rep, a sales rep. I worked for my family business, Eagle Imports. Our number one gun was the Bursa Thunder 380. I mean, we sold that like hotcakes back then. There really wasn't any competition for that gun because it was so much cheaper than a Walther PPK. And then when you got kind of down to a smaller 380 that was in the price point range, it was Keltec's, and Keltec's 380 was nothing like ours. So I consider that the good old days because we were just sold out constantly. But I would go and I would do these promos at stores where they would let me work behind the counter during the day, like for the store, and promote Bursa. And it was crazy because, I'd show the Bursa to be, and every single guy would do the same thing. They'd be like, what is this thing right here? And I'm like, it's an integral locking system. And they're like, oh, I would never use that. I'm like, well, you don't have to use it. It's just there. I'm like, I always just tell people, I'm like, don't throw your car radio out because you don't like country Western music. Like that doesn't make any sense. Just don't go to the country Western station. But I sold more of those Thunder 380s because of the integral locking system. Because what would happen is there would be some single mother, some grandmother, it's just a lady who wanted to get into shooting sports, and she loved the 380. It was a great starter gun for somebody because it was a little less recoil than a 9mm, a little less gun, but they could kind of get their footing. And I would always say, hey, do you ever have kids in your house? Like, do you ever have kids? And sure enough, people say, well, yeah, we have, like, my grandkids come over. I'm like, hey, if you ever wanted to just lock the gun up so it becomes a paperweight, use this integral locking system. And I sold more guns like that.
Sure.
And if I would have listened to, Joe Patriot, like, who was hell bent to like, that shouldn't even be on there. That's ridiculous. It's like, no, you need to. There are people, they want safety, right? Like, people want to feel secure and safe. And a lot of people that buy firearms have a fear of their own firearm. Like they're overcoming that fear. And you may have convinced your spouse or your lover, whoever, I want a gun in this house, and they might not be comfortable with it. But if you could make them feel good about it, look, I got this gun, I got this locking device that, I promise I will train with it and I will learn with it, but I will keep this thing locked when people are over. So you don't have to worry. Like, what's wrong with that? Right? Like, that's not, that's responsible.
and women are smarter than we are. Let's just face it. I mean, they you know, they just are smarter than we are. They see things a lot more clear than we see them sometimes.
Yeah, that's why they live
And
longer, right? Because
they live longer. That's right. I mean, you don't see a woman saying, "Here, hold my beer,"
yeah.
or "Hey, watch
Watch
this."
this.
I mean, watch this. That's not in their vernacular. It's like I wouldn't do that. So
Yeah.
no, but no, I get it. I get it. And women, listen. As an agent, I carried 1 to 2 pistols every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 360 for 26 years. And invariably, um, I would wake up and I'd find my gun in 3 different pieces around the house from where I'd come home late at night and just put it up on the refrigerator, and my wife would come down and remove the slide and remove the barrel and put the barrel here and the slide here, and I'm like, what the heck? And she goes, you were tired and I didn't want to wake you to say, hey, lock it up. So I just kind of took it apart, and I'm like, okay, don't rip it in
That
pieces because I need that.
yeah, that's pretty. Hey, a lot of
It's
people would
like,
be afraid to touch it. So good on her.
yeah,
Like, you know what I mean? Like, we work in a lot of
no,
behavioral health scenarios where people are just like, I don't even know how to, they want to help, but they're just like, I don't even know how to do some of the stuff you're saying, right? Like how to take a
right.
slide off, or they just don't want to engage with it. And that's a good segue into talk about what in the chat. Janine Turner: the majority of my career in nursing has been in trauma. Many people I cared for were a result of firearm injury. This gun lock has the potential to save lives. And it's true. And that's why we need more people that work in healthcare to know that these
Yeah.
products exist, because they can be recommended.
You know what's interesting about that comment is, most of the studies that I've been part of, or just in the back, just kind of talking to people about, they seek me out to kind of check themselves. But most of those studies are from nurses, and most of them are ER nurses or trauma nurses, because or trauma doctors, and those are people who see the end results of a lot of this stuff on a day in and day out basis. And I'm sure that many times, in this young lady's career, or in a lot of doctors' careers, they sit there and just shake their head saying, this is 100% avoidable. What are we doing here? um, and they're right. They're absolutely right. So
Yeah. I mean, I'm not afraid to tell this story. It does not make me look good, but my first time shooting a firearm was a negligent discharge because I didn't understand one in the chamber. But you guys have all heard me say it, especially the dedicated listeners. We found my friend's dad's firearm. Well, we didn't find it. My friend knew exactly where it was. It was a 9mm Beretta. It was upstairs. He
mhm.
was a DEA agent. We went
Wow.
up there. My friend took the firearm, dropped the mag, and he pointed the gun at the bed. And I had enough sense to, like, because he said, "Do you think this thing is still loaded?" And I said, "Wait, wait, hold on." Like, took the gun out of his hand. We went outside to the lawn, and I shot a hole in the lawn. Right? Like, if, yeah,
Hmm.
we got really lucky that day that nobody got hurt and nobody got in trouble. we we swept that under the rug. We got really under the lawn. We got really lucky. But looking back on that moment, that's something that could have been avoidable with this product. That
Absolutely, absolutely could have been avoidable. And the thing is, boys are different than girls. And if you have boys or grandsons in your house, um, they're gonna find your gun. It's plain and simple. And they're gonna touch it and they're gonna play with it and it's in our DNA, right? As American males, it's in our DNA, and it's gonna happen. And so the question is it gonna be locked up with a lock of this quality and caliber that makes this firearm a paperweight, or is it going to be something that he can defeat, get the key, unlock it, and then start playing with it? Because he's not going to defeat this. And Is it expensive? Yes, it's expensive. Is it the best in the market? Absolutely, it's the best in the market. Is it worth it? You're right. And I don't know anybody who'd say, eh, I'd rather spend $1.50 on this and be at the hospital or worse, as opposed to 150 on this and be sitting around the house, watching TV or something, you know.
Yeah, it is expensive. We got to get creative with ways of getting people money back. I totally see this type of product as also, a lot of these suicide prevention and mental health coalitions or groups, organizations, they get grants and they have money to spend on some of those things. So I think like
Right.
your company developing relationships in some of those areas is, like I said, the researchers need to know that this stuff exists. Uh, you know, this year, uh, we're going to go to the research conference that's in Phoenix. It was in Seattle last year,
Hmm.
but one of the things that kind of light bulb that went off, because everybody there is researching gun violence, harm reduction, right? Like,
Sure.
but I'm like, half these people do not know about the technology and the products that are out there to be able
That's right.
to even suggest to their patients or their clients or anybody. And that's understandable because I tell people all the time, I said it yesterday on the show that we had somebody on. I said, I am not a golfer. So I don't know the latest in golfing technology. I don't know the products. I don't know anything. But if someone was said, "Hey, like your new job now is to kind of sort of dip your toe into golf world," I would need somebody to say, "Mike, this is the latest. This is the
Hmm.
greatest. This is this."
Right.
You know what I mean? To
Hmm.
even know it exists. So we just have to do a better job of kind of promoting safety, which I think has always been put on the back burner when it comes to the firearms industry in terms of
Yes.
the afterthought, like.
It has. Listen, I've done a lot of training of police, federal agents, people in the gun industry, people who have gun ranges, trainers, train the trainers, and on the range, and how to shoot. And we start all the way back to the basics. I mean, back to the basics. And it's funny because I don't care how often you carry a gun, whether it's part of your job or not, the training you've had in your past. We always start all the way back to the basics on, where do you keep, how do you lock it? How do you keep your finger off the trigger? Keeping, where's the muzzle pointed? All those little things. And then we just step our way up, and invariably it's funny. I don't think I've had one person in all these years say, "Oh, that was a little too, too slow or too rudimentary." They've all said, "I needed that. I needed that that reminder to say, hey, do these little things." I mean, because it's dangerous.
Yeah. Kevin, you.
Yeah, just around this conversation, it'd be nice to evolve like the mandated cable locks with all handguns. Like we've come a long way from the handgun or the cable lock that Scott kind of demonstrated. Not the best item out there, and we touched on incentivizing. I don't know what it would look like, but some kind of rebate with eligible items, or just evolving it to the best and latest and greatest options out there instead of something that we all know is kind of a little bit outdated and kind of a waste and trash in a lot of people's minds.
This cable lock probably costs 37 cents to make. They're all made in China. It says right here, made in China. And you know what? This is what the military gives out. So right now, the U.S. military's um, suicide prevention is we'll just hand everybody a gun lock who has a gun. That's it. And that Office of Suicide Prevention has boxes of these sitting at each military base, and they just hand these out as you want it. And I've talked to some of the heads of the Office of Suicide Prevention and said, you're handing out a 37-cent cable lock, for crying out loud, and you're calling that suicide prevention. You know come on, what are you doing? And they recognize that it's not the best situation, but they're trying to do the best they can given the resources that they have. but we have, we have a problem in this country with service members taking their own lives and hurting themselves, with first responders taking their own lives and hurting themselves. And it's something that we need to be very serious about finding a solution. Look, if we can put somebody on the moon, we can solve this problem. We have to be dedicated, and we have to really want to do it, um, and address the problem. And it's not going to be one way. It's going to be three or four different ways, and it's going to be very fluid. And this may work in this situation, but it may not work in the other situation. So what are the multitude of ways of doing this? So
Yeah, I think Kevin and I always say the message that comes with that cable lock is more important probably than the cable lock itself, right?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah, no, absolutely. It
It-
goes. I know we've talked about this. You and I have spoken about this, but we've got the deeper issue here is mental health and access to firearms, and how do we address that problem, because that is a problem, and is there a way that we can address mental health with possession, use, purchase of firearms, because I think that's an issue that we really ought to try hard to figure out. So.
no, I agree. What was your journey with firearms? Like, how did you grow up with them,
Oh,
or did you?
yeah. No, well, yes and no. So there were a lot of kids in my house, and my father, who had been in the military, um, did not want a gun in the house because he knew that there was a pretty good chance that somebody was going to shoot somebody else. So, with the house full of boys, he just didn't allow any guns in the house, which was fine. Um, but at 18 years old, I bought a rifle, a used rifle, and started going deer hunting. And then I bought a shotgun, and then another shotgun. And I was, I like to go hunting. I like to go deer hunting. I like to go bird hunting. And I've been a hunter my whole life. Um, and I never really owned a well, I never owned a handgun until I became an agent. And then, for me, um, uh, look, I always tell people, I was a sniper. I was on two different tactical teams, um, and so I've had all the training and done all the things. But for me, a gun is nothing more than like a carpenter. It's like my hammer. It was a tool. It was a tool that I was very proficient at and used on a regular basis. But at the same respect, it was just part of my job. Part of the tool, part of the tools that I needed to do my job. So it wasn't. I've been more of a hunter than anything else. So, and I still bird hunt.
And how did the opportunity come up to work for the ATF? I think the ATF is very I've seen it like kind of evolve over the years. Now it's kind of demonized, right? We're talking about abolish the ATF,
Right.
which is a rally
Sure.
cry. Did you hear a lot of that when you were at the ATF? Was there a lot of abolish the
Oh yeah.
ATF back then? Okay.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I was there when the NRA was doing its big fundraiser, and using ATF as the mechanism to raise money. So people could travel first class and buy expensive suits and haircuts. So
The suit
but
budget is the elusive thing that Walk the
that's
Talk
right.
America
That's right.
needs to
That's
operate. If we can just get me that Wayne LaPierre suit budget, there's so much good that we could do.
oh my
No,
gosh.
so that's
Yeah.
interesting. I never, when
Yeah.
I first
So
got in the industry in the '90s, I didn't, I wasn't that, I wasn't that focused on those things. So I guess I didn't. We always worked with our local ATF agent that would drop in a few times a year and we had a good working relationship. I would say that, you know,
so a lot of people. Yeah. So a lot of people don't realize. Um, the ATF is really an agency with that's bifurcated. Okay, on one hand, you have the agents, and the agents basically investigate violations of federal law. And actually, ATF is the agency that is the federal. Um, I call it the offensive line of federal law enforcement. They're the guys in the trenches. They're going after all the violent crime. It's not white collar. It's true violent crime, murder for hire, biker cases, drug cartel cases, firearms trafficking. All the ugly stuff. And then the other side of the house is the inspection side. And the inspection side basically uh, was regulating the alcohol industry, the tobacco industry, and the firearms industry. And in 2004, a lot of that went over, but they kept the firearms industry side. So there's only about 500 or 600 inspectors to inspect 135,000 federal firearms licensees. So you say, well, how are 500 going to inspect 135,000? It's statistically impossible to do that, and you're supposed to do it once a year. So what they do is they do a statistical analysis on the most at-risk federal firearms licenses, and there are certain things they look at to determine whether you're getting inspected or not. But on the law enforcement side, all you're doing is you're targeting and going after organizations and criminals. ATF. So I actually had been working for the State Department. I worked for the U.S. Department of State, and I worked in Latin America. I was actually living and stationed down in Central and South America in the late 80s and early 90s. And I decided, I really would like to, kind of stick a little bit close to home and affect violent crime and work that a little bit. And so I started kind of doing my research, and it was a toss up between DEA and ATF. And so I applied to ATF and actually got hired. And so I was started working in the early 90s for ATF as an agent, and then working my way up through the ranks, as it were.
That's interesting. So I would say the it's a weird position to be in because it's just like law enforcement these days. Like law enforcement, I think it's a thankless job at this point, right? Like people,
Right.
people just come down on law enforcement. They don't realize like how difficult that job is and what the expectation level of law enforcement is now. Like people think they should be mental health experts. It's like, they should be trained in this, they should be trained in that. It's like there's only so many hours in a day to train people properly. And then when are they supposed to work? Right. Like I always question when people say really bizarre things and they kind of flip it about like what it takes to
Right.
actually get what you need. Um, but I remember talking with Colleen Noir, who is a very popular person in the Second Amendment world, right? The 2A world, the culture. I remember we were talking about the ATF one time, and he's like, "Man, you'd be shocked at how many agents like get in line for an autograph, and they're like, hey, you got a lot of fans in the ATF." And I'm like, God, what a weird space to be in because people are going to make you sort of this villain, but you're super
Right.
pro 2A. And you know what I mean? It's a job. And like you said, it's not just harassing FFLs and manufacturers. There's a whole other side of it where, you're going after people that are doing things that actually add to the negative outcomes of firearms. And that stuff gets used against us. Um,
Right.
it's a weird balance.
So when it's strange, and what you got to have is a thick skin, and B is you got to, look, you're just enforcing the laws. You may not agree with all the laws, but you got to enforce the laws. And if you focus on the violence and the violent crime, it's never that big a deal, because I don't know anybody in this country who's for violent crime other than the criminals, hardened criminals. I mean, people don't know because we don't tout ourselves or pat ourselves on the back very much, and a lot to our detriment. But ATF was, to my knowledge, at this point, the only agency to have ATF agents undercover in MS-13 as members of, I mean, and taking down the organization from the inside out. Um, and same thing with biker investigations or other criminal, the Klan, some of these other neo-Nazi organizations. They're not afraid. Those organizations aren't afraid of the FBI. They're afraid of the ATF because they know that they consistently get infiltrated and removed by them, and they know that they're not afraid to do so. But it is a bit of a weird dynamic. I worked in Gary, Indiana, as a supervisor when Gary was the murder capital of the world,
Right.
and it had three of the top crime gun federal firearms licensees out of the top 25 in the country. Three were right there within the area, and you know the thing is you look at so one gun dealer in particular was the only gun store in Gary. Guess and Gary's a crappy place, and that's where everybody went to go buy their guns, and so they were just a high volume dealer. They weren't doing anything wrong. And by the way, they were selling Lorsons and Bursas and some of the less expensive firearms, a lot of Caltex, a lot of Lorsons. But the crime rate was through the roof, and we had an agent behind the counter on a regular basis. There's a great relationship. It's a weird thing because there's usually a great relationship between the agents and the gun dealers. Now they don't want to talk about that relationship. They don't want anybody to know that they're helping out. But without the help and assistance of really solid FFLs, our job would be significantly harder.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that because I had a relationship with a gentleman named Don from Don's Guns in Indianapolis, and he always we had talks, and he was always like, "Man, the ATF's always I'm always making a list of like places where my guns are used in crimes," and he's like, "I don't." We just sell guns like that, he's like, we sell guns on volume, you know what I mean? And it's true. Like he had successful businesses. He had these crazy commercials. He was Jimmy Hoffa's right hand man, but he was just like, of course I'm going to be on the list because of the sheer volume I do. There's no way
Right.
that you try to do your best, but it's you can look for things like straw purchases, but it's not foolproof. You know what I mean? If someone
No,
comes in,
no.
yeah, and you can't discriminate. Like you have to. If someone is checking all the boxes and hitting the marks, and they pass their background check, and they're purchasing that firearm, that's it, right? Everyone has the right to the Second Amendment. So it's a tough call. I see both sides of it. One question that just came in through the chat, and I want to know your thoughts about this is, how do you feel about the NICS system accessing mental health records?
Um, that's a great question. I let me think about the best way to phrase this. I don't think the NICS system should access mental health records, but but I believe and I know that there are certain and for your mental health professionals, if I use the wrong term, please accept my apologies ahead of time. I think there are certain maladies, illnesses, mental health maladies, personality disorders, or whatnot, which are 100% uncurable. Okay, schizophrenia, antisocial, and so I guess the term for uncurable is chronic. Okay, they're chronic conditions. They're not going to go away, and I think those conditions pose a significant threat to the public, especially when firearms possession is involved. So um, I'm not crazy about the NICS system accessing mental health records, but I do believe that if a mental health professional comes across somebody who is paranoid, schizophrenic, and violent, that they should have a mechanism to report that to the NICS system. That then that would cause a denial of purchasing. That individual who was denied would have an appeal process that they could actually go seek another mental health professional and get reevaluated. and then they would be on a regular calendar to constantly get reevaluated. Because a lot of times people are normal when they're on their medication, and they're not normal when they're not on their medication. But I think rather than the NICS accessing your mental health, I think the mental health professional with a certain very tight criteria of diagnosis through the DSM-5, should be able to sit there and say, okay, this guy fits or this gal fits in this square box. I'm going to let NICS know that, and I think that should do it, because right now the laws governing possession by those who have mental health problems are really unrealistic, and they're not really restrictive at all. So
Yeah, it's a very difficult conversation. It's just like what Kevin said earlier about insurance, right? There's all these places you can go with it, and then potentially it's like who's making the decision on that criteria? What is their belief system in firearms? Right? Like, I mean, there's all these things that you have to look for, and it is very difficult, right? Someone once told me, and this person worked in behavioral health and is very highly decorated epidemiologist, Dr. Jeffrey Swanson. He was just like, look, you can hand 10 people who have schizophrenia a firearm. You could have 10 people that have bipolar disorder and hand them a firearm, and they'll never do anything horrible with it.
right.
They won't hurt a fly. But, Mike, you could come home, catch your wife in bed with your best friend and snap, and I just thought, man, this is such a difficult thing. Like, we all agree, pro gun, anti gun people, like, we all agree that certain people shouldn't have their certain guns at certain time. Right? Some people believe that no one should have a gun at a certain time, right? But like,
Right.
I think this is what makes it difficult. I appreciate you not ducking and dodging that question. It's a tough one to put you on the spot to answer, right? Because we
No,
all
it's
don't
okay.
have
Yeah.
we don't have the answers. And that's why we got to keep discussing these things and bringing up these points.
So let's look at what the law says now. Okay, and we'll use that as a starting point. The law says it's under 18 USC 922G, and it previously said, and this is important, so it'll take just a few seconds here. It previously said that to be prohibited from possessing a firearm, you had to be mentally adjudicated. Okay, as defective, mentally adjudicated. That means that you had to go in front of a judge, and a judge had to say, you're crazy. And at that point, you become prohibited. Well, nobody ever gets mentally adjudicated. I mean, our court systems are packed as it is. Very few. I'm sure you're going to get a lot of comments on this, and that's okay. So what
Right,
happens
right.
is that's so what happens is they changed the law, and then they said, okay, we're going to take away this high bar of mental adjudication, and we're actually going to say that if you were committed to a mental institution for whatever, for treatment or whatnot. Okay, that kind of makes sense, except for this. If I go and check myself in to a mental facility because I'm feeling crazy or I'm going to hurt myself or others, that's not prohibiting. So self-surrender to a mental facility is not a prohibiting factor. In fact, it specifically says it is. I have to be committed. So they took this mental adjudication by a judge, a court, and they just took a half step back and said, well, if a mental profession, if a doctor says, no, you're crazy, you need to go in, there you go. And you have people in this country right now who are under Social Security benefits because they're mentally incapacitated to do anything, who are getting state benefits, yet they can go out and buy and possess guns all day long, but yet the state's paying them because they're too crazy. And I know crazy is not the right word, but they're too ill to work. So uh,
Yeah, I think the
there
problem.
has to be a solution, right?
Yeah, the problem I have with that question, and it's just from experience. I mean, I've received way more phone calls and emails from people that don't understand that question, like literally don't understand that
Mm-hmm.
question at all. Like, they're like, well, it says mentally adjudicated, and even though like you understand it, a lot of people don't, and I think that just because when they were 14 they checked themselves into some kind of facility that they've lost their gun
Mm-mm.
rights, right? I don't think it's clear enough on there needs to be a lot more clarity there because it confuses the
Yeah.
hell out of people.
The problem is, and going back to the original question of should NICS be allowed to look at your mental health records? The concern I have is this, and I'm sure it's a concern a lot of your listeners have, and it should be a concern to everybody. You don't want the federal government making that determination ex post facto that they get access to your mental health. Because what you don't want is somebody to come in and say, well, he's been diagnosed with PTSD. Because there was a period not too long ago where everybody who saw combat was getting that PTSD diagnosis when they left the military, when they separated from the military, and they went through the final, physical check. Everybody was like, "Oh, you have to have PTSD because you saw combat, you saw this and that." It doesn't necessarily mean they have PTSD, but you don't want PTSD then to become prohibiting from them possessing a firearm, or you're suffering from depression. We know that being depressed doesn't make you suicidal. Being depressed and having a heightened anxiety does. And there's a study that just came out, I think, out of Rutgers University. It says the higher your anxiety level with a baseline of depression increases your suicidal ideation. It's the anxiety that drives it, not so much the depression. The depression on itself doesn't. So what you don't want is them mucking around and messing with that stuff, after they've actually gotten access to it. So
You touched on like the re-examining and that. It just seems like nobody wants that call on their plate. I know Mike and I, we're hearing conversations with like FFLs taking in temporary storage for gun owners' firearms, and a lot of them don't want the responsibility of, oh, you gave this firearm back too soon. I think you make a great point of it. Once something's decided, maybe they shouldn't have access to that at that time, but then nobody wants to be on the hook for deciding when they're given the green light. And that seems to be the kind of barrier between everything right now.
yeah, we had there was an incident one night where I got a call from a police officer who stops a van on the interstate, and he calls me from the roadside, and he had the husband was in custody, and he was a neo-Nazi. The wife was in custody because she came after the deputy with a knife. And when he opened the back of the van, there was Nazi flags and all this other stuff, and it was packed full of guns. And they were heading up into Idaho. And he said, what should I do? And I said, well, are they convicted felons? Are they, are you arresting them or this? And so he arrested the wife for assault, right? But he said, what do I do with all these guns? The husband just wants to leave the wife, take the guns, and go north. I said, take the guns. And he goes, well, this is before we had red flag laws. I said, take the guns, for Christ's sake, take the guns, put them in your vault. And he says, well, under what authority? And I said, because it's the right thing to do. I don't know where he's going with these, and I don't know who this guy is, and you don't either. And I said, but you know what? There's an interesting little Colorado law that says that you have to show ownership of your of firearms. If something's taken into custody. And he said, okay. So I gave him the statute number, and he looked at it and he says, okay. So I said, does he have receipts for each of these guns? How do we know they're not stolen? Where did he come from? Where was he going? What was he going to do? He can't answer any of these questions, right? Well, ask him if he's got the receipts for them. And the guy lost his mind. He says, I don't have the receipts for these. He goes, well, I've got, I can't let you have them. And so we ended up taking the guns out of it. What we stopped or didn't stop, I don't know. I know he came back. He never could produce the receipts, and so they were destroyed. But just trying to do the right thing and under, not just saying, well, there's nothing I can do, let it go.
Yeah, because it's a double-edged sword for that officer, right? Like
right.
he may have unwillingly like harassed somebody who was never. I mean, look, I'm not here to to say someone with a Nazi flag is a good person, right? Like it's
Yeah.
not.
No, I know.
You know,
Yeah.
people can make those arguments. I'm not that guy, man. I see a
Right.
Nazi flag and I get disgusted. So,
Yeah.
you know, but in one sense, you know, I understand that, like, we don't know what he was going to do with them. Maybe he was just a wacko that like literally wanted to shoot. But in the same, like, if he lets that guy go, and then those guns are used in something horrific, so it's like, how do you make? Like Kevin said, who wants to make the call? It's the toughest. So you have to make the call like you just did and say, like, I have the balls to make this call and I'm going to put my reputation on the line to make this call, because it just, something doesn't feel right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's a,
and thus becomes where you get a lot of criticism, right? So it's all of a sudden, I took the guns because I don't want to be the guy sitting there answering why didn't I do this or why didn't I do that? You know what I mean? And
right. Yeah. You had him. He was right there. You had the car stopped and you saw the guns in the back of the van and you didn't do anything. Right. But it's the same thing. You're going to get fried for if the guy makes a big fuss and says, "Oh, I was just being harassed for exercising my Second Amendment right." Like yeah. I mean, once again, I can see why people don't want to even put themselves in this position and take these jobs, right? Because it's it's a tough call. You know what I used to always? You'll probably laugh at this, Scott, because you understand this. So when I went to work for my family, I remember my uncle was like, "These are ATF traces." Like, this is the form that comes through on the fax. And back then it was on a fax machine. And I swear the ATF had it out for me because on a Friday night, 5 minutes before I was supposed to leave work, 25 traces would come through. I was like, what are they watching me? You know, and keep in mind, I'm like
yeah,
of
course.
Yeah, a 21-year-old.
Yeah.
I just want to go out. But I remember because my uncle's like, if you leave a tracer on the fax, I'll kill you. You know, he said, everything when these come through, you stop what you're doing and you handle it. And I had to go up, and the way the records are kept, it wasn't electronically back then. I would have to go up into like this vault that we had above our office, and I would have to file through and look and find who we sold the gun to, produce that, fax it back to the ATF, right? Like any information we had on that firearm, and go. But the crazy part is I never knew what the issue, it doesn't tell you what the gun, why you're asking that. Like, why is Scott asking me this? It just says,
Sure.
I need information on all these guns. And I would sit there and I'd be super curious. Like, I'm like, God, I wonder what the history is right now with this firearm. Like, did it make its way down to New Mexico from New Jersey via Don's gun shop in Indianapolis and now is used in a triple homicide? You know what I mean? Like, it was kind of a fascinating thing. Right. Do you remember traces?
Oh yeah, I traced them all the time. We had, listen, we started our investigations a lot of times by looking at the traces. So, for instance, we had a bunch of guns that were bought in Colorado that were being recovered in shootings and armed robberies in New York City. We had guns that were being bought in Colorado that were coming up in crack houses in Chicago and Gary and East Chicago and Whiting and Calumet City. They were coming. They were appearing over in Compton, California, coming out of Colorado, and because there's this whole dynamic of you have a source state and a market state, right? Your source state is Indiana's a source state, okay, because it has really lax gun laws, and then you have a market state which has really tight, which is like Illinois, like up in Chicago or New York or some of these others. But some of those traces. So the rule of thumb is if it's involved in a homicide, they'll get a response back in 24 hours. But then they look at the time to crime, and what they're looking at is the time that from the time it was purchased to the time it was recovered in a crime. The average time to crime for all traces is 11 years. So what they do is they focus on the ones that are 12 to 18 months. So if you buy a gun today and it's used in a crime tomorrow or in 6 or 12 months, that you're close, and that's what you're looking at. So a lot of
Yeah,
those
it's
traces you're running, who knows what they were for.
yeah, it was fascinating. Like I said, it's weird. It's like the only person that I've ever heard like say that their position, their job was very similar, and I'm not even comparing like me doing a trace to what this person said, was one of the 911 operators we had on the show one time. And she's like,
Hmm.
we take the call and we are walking through somebody, and it could be their darkest moment. But once we hang up, we're out of it and we're on to the next call. Right. And
Right.
she was like, and sometimes, she's like, I'd run into a police officer and I'm like, what happened on that call? Like, was that like the worst call ever? And they're like, oh, it was nothing. And she's like, really? That was nothing. Right. Like, and that's kind of felt like I never got resolved from
Sure.
sending the information. No, but I would sit there and I'd be super curious. I'm just like, okay, this gun we brought in 1989. Like, I wonder where it is right now.
So we, I've been doing a lot with mental wellness for first responders, and believe it or not, dispatchers suffer the most because of what you just said. You just hit the nail on the head. It's it's watching it's watching the first 40 minutes of your favorite sitcom and then turning it off for the last 20 minutes when it's resolved, and you never get to see the ending. And so what happens is you see, and this is a problem that a lot of people have, is um, for military personnel and for first responders, often the guys who are right in the middle of the action, okay, bullets are flying, they're running and jumping, they're shooting back, leads going back and forth. Those guys are often okay. The people who have the hardest time are the people in the periphery, the support, the people who were part of the unit but not part of the shootout. They're in a different area. They could hear it on the radio. Not the people in the middle of the action, but the concentric circles outside. And the further the circles get, as long as they're connected, they seem to have the hardest time with coping with a critical incident. And the reason why is their imagination's working. Oh my God, what would I have done? How would I have handled this? Oh my God, what's that? And I can't tell you how many times I've been involved in shooting that I looked at the guy next to me going, they were shooting at me. What the hell what are you worried about? You know what I mean? Let's go eat a hamburger. And they're like, oh,
Were
so
you always
it's,
good at processing it like that? Or
oh
was
yeah,
like the first
yeah.
time you were involved in a shootout where you're like, what the?
No, it's always good. It's just preparation.
You think that's what it is?
No,
Because I would say, like, a lot of people could prepare all they want, and then it's like Mike Tyson. Everyone has a plan until they get hit.
yeah, or they see an ear that looks pretty tasty,
Right.
but I think it's just who you are as an individual, to be honest with
Right.
you.
Like, I think there's a
Preparing's one
part that you
thing.
have to be sort of built for that. You know what I mean?
That's right.
It's like when
That's right.
like Saving Private Ryan, right? Tom
Mhm.
Sizemore's character would never flinch when the bombs are going off.
Right.
Remember that? Like, everybody would like
Right.
flinch and he was just like
Hmm.
walking normal. Like, I think that's just some people are built a certain way. Um,
Right.
yeah, it's
I th-
interesting. Well,
yeah. Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
No, I was going to
No,
say I agree.
yeah. Yeah. Well, Kevin, what are your thoughts? You've been quiet today. Kevin's a little bit, usually he's like Silent Bob and Jay.
Silent Bob.
No, just there's a lot of knots that we quickly get into, like that, like the insurance thing. On the surface, it seems like a great idea and to incentivize people financially that can't afford a locking device or something like that. That's often seen as a luxury on after home protection and the firearms address. But then we see all the data that comes in our face, Mike, of, homes with firearms are at a much greater risk for suicide, XYZ. So I can just see how, you get this discount, but your rate's actually higher because we know now you own a firearm. Or the last conversation where we talked about nobody wants that decision on their plate. Like, we know these things are needed, but there's just so many hoops and tangles to get through the forest, it seems.
The thing is, Kevin, and here's kind of where we've gone. There are so many guns in the population right now. There's more guns than there are U.S. citizens. It's a fact. Okay,
Mhm.
and that's because a lot of people have more than one. Okay, but but what happens is you're going to see insurance companies, and I'm sure they're doing it already, that are kind of just assuming there's a gun in the house, so they're jacking the rates up anyway. It's kind of like with this concealed carry thing. Everybody has concealed carry, so police officers are just assume that you're carrying a firearm, so they're handling things different. Um, the other thing is, and if we in the last few minutes, if we want to get into it a little bit, is we have AI now that is kind of jumping in the middle of a lot of these topics, right? So how does artificial intelligence affect what the insurance company is doing, and how is that kind of taking all this big data and boiling it down, and then how is it going to affect um, you know the future of ATF doing inspections? How's it going to affect law enforcement and things of that nature as well? So
Yeah, let's get into that because I think
sure.
this is coming. And here's what I'm afraid of with the firearms industry is that we try to say it's awful, we try to say it's bad, we don't embrace it in certain situations, and it's going to come to bite us in the ass because the wrong people are going to once again be in control of all the AI. Just like I think like we stood in on the sidelines far too long when it came to the topic of mental health and suicide. Um, I would like to see the firearms industry embrace some AI and maybe get behind it to where we can sort of control some narratives, right? Because I think there's ways that it can be used where we can find some positive stuff out about how people use their firearms, right?
Hmm.
Uh, and it's just like it's got to come from the trusted messengers. It's got to be super transparent on what we're trying to accomplish here. But I know a lot of people, like I don't know about you, Kevin, what you've seen, but I mean, I know a lot of people that are really worried that uh, if they do something with AI and AI does not like the answer or misunderstands the intentionality of the person, it's like alarms going off, and you know what I mean. And I think that's a very very valid concern. That's why I tell people, like with text message, I'm like, be careful with text because you don't know how the person is reading that you know whereas if I say something to you, like, my tone, the way I'm looking at you, or at least if you can hear it, and I think that's where people are just a little afraid of AI. I don't know. What are your thoughts,
So
Scott?
yeah, so no, everything you're saying, I agree with, but here's what's kind of going on, and here's the problem is you know we I've always been basically my whole career focused on violent crime and the reduction of violent crime. What strategies? And a lot of the gun industry stuff I've done was kind of an offshoot of violent crime, right? How do we reduce violent crime? People buy more guns because they feel they're not safe and they feel the police can't protect them. And there's violent crime. I mean, you got home invasions occurring in rural America. I mean, and your police response time is 40 minutes. I mean, if you don't have a gun in your house and live in rural America, shame on you, right? If you're a single gal who lives in BFE and on a farm, if you don't have a gun, well, we know they do. So let's look at the core problem is violent crime. So here's what's kind of happened in the past 10 years. So the average homicide rate was about 6 per 100,000, 6.2 per 100,000. It's remained the same. And since everybody's been looking at this since the early 1900s, we're solving about 62%. This is national average, 62% of the homicides. Um, uh, that's our clearance rate. Well, and it's usually been around 40% on sexual assault. What about 10 years ago, and we kind of touched on this earlier, because, you know, policing is not an easy job, and it's gotten a lot harder since I've left. And the guys and gals who are doing it are so hamstrung that they can't, they're so restricted in everything they do. Um, and so you have an industry that's been downsized. You have an industry that that is having to promote people way above their time, the clearance rates have dropped. So what I've started noticing over the past year is your clearance rate for homicides down to 52%. We think we think that only 30 to 40% of the sexual assaults even get reported. And the clearance rate for sexual assaults is down to 26%. So what does that mean? Well, what that means is you have about 350,000 unsolved homicides in this country, and it's increasing by 10,000 every year. And we have 8 million unsolved violent crimes in this country, and it's increasing by a million every year. And so now the question is how do you reverse that trend? Your resources aren't getting any bigger. How do you reverse that trend? And so there's a company out there that I'm very familiar with called esleuth.ai. And what they've done is taken AI and said, how do we address violent crime? How do we resolve this? How do we assist the police? But do it in such a way that it doesn't hallucinate, right? It doesn't create issues. And so they've developed this patented approach that is evidentiary based that allows them to actually point out, here are your suspects, here's the vehicles, it's a solution-based, evidence-based system. And I've heard somebody say, well, that's kind of nothing more than that old movie Minority Report. No, it has nothing to do with it, because all your legal things, your probable cause, your reasonable doubt are all still in play. You still have to go in front of a judge and all this other things. But what it does is take all this data and boil it down, and then create timely, actionable leads by working through it. So AI in the right hands, focused at the right things with the right setup, is going to really help this country out. AI for just general purposes is not really a great thing. So
Yeah, it's like Kevin always says, it's like a gun, right? A gun
yeah,
is a tool in the hands of the right person. It's a great
that's
tool.
right.
In the hands of a wrong person. How do you feel about AI's role? And this is another tough one, Scott. So I don't expect you to have some amazing answer, but I think we're just all talking here. But how do you feel about AI's role in suicide prevention?
You know, if there's a silver bullet and AI had it, that'd be great. But I have to
Right.
tell you, suicide prevention, suicide is such a complicated topic. Okay. And we all try very diligently to wrap our head around it, right? Try to make sense of what doesn't make sense is quite simply it. I mean, I see people who commit suicide and I look and I just can't figure it out. I'm like, why would they do that? Life is not that I'm not built that way, thank God. But I don't see things the way they do, right? We know that males, there's a huge significant amount of males that are intoxicated in one form or another when they commit suicide because they don't understand the finality of it. We know that people who have committed suicide and walked up to death's doorstep, I mean, they were like almost very successful, have come and they survived it, are adamant that they would never do that again, and they had no idea what they were thinking about. The people who jump from bridges but actually survive, the people who shoot themselves in the head but actually survive, are some of the biggest, messengers out there saying, "I would never do that again." Well, I don't know what I was thinking. That was the most horrible thing. I know people who have overdosed on fentanyl who came out and were completely changed people because after their heart stopped 6 times and they got it going on number 7, they were convinced they were at the place below, not the place above, and they don't ever want to do that again or go there. And so I AI and suicide prevention, I don't foresee it. I mean, we know it's like cancer, right? Everybody gets cancer for different reasons. It's because you know genetics a lot of times, and why you can smoke 2 packs a day and live to be 105, and I can smoke 3 cigarettes and I'm dead with lung cancer in a week. So there's too many variables out there for AI to get involved.
There's not
Yeah,
enough data.
yeah. I think it's coming though. Like I look at, we all know that more than half to 2/3 of all gun deaths are suicide. And the gun is one of the most effective ways. Obviously, standing in front of a train, pretty effective. But when you talk about access, ease, and getting the job done, like the gun is probably what we look at as number one. It's coming. Whether we like it or not, it's coming.
You'd almost have to set it up like this and have a lot of trust in gun owners or the sample population, and have it hop on with the AI chat every single day so it could get a reading of where you are, and then also some way to have that finality of information that doesn't exist. Because if that person unfortunately does commit suicide, they're not going to hop onto the chat. Does that know that it was suicide, or did they just hop out of the research program? So something like that, and that would take a lot of work, because I mean, we haven't replaced mental health professionals yet because it doesn't have enough information to be able to replicate that quality of performance. But the capability is there in 5-10 years.
Yeah, Kevin, what you're saying, that actually is kind of interesting. So what you're saying is you could program some LLMs, large language models, right? And then you start feeding all the, if somebody's writing something or their emails or texts or something, you start feeding that into those large language models. And that's nothing more than a clinician does. They kind of read what they're writing and saying, this is suicide ideation, or have somebody speak into a camera, and then it kind of takes that voice to text and kind of analyzes that as well. And AI could, very easily do that just through those large language models and whatnot. But again, that now you're really kind of getting into, what do you do next? Do you notify somebody? Do you not notify somebody? What do you do? And that's the kind of scary part.
And does doing
Is
that process at a high level reduce the suicide risk to where you don't get enough outcomes in a study, and you never really fully get data to explain the impact of the reducing suicides?
right? Absolutely. So I
Well,
don't know.
yeah, we don't have the answers, but we got to keep talking about it, because
Sure.
the ideas come from the discussions, right?
Hmm.
I want to thank you, Scott, for coming in today, and thank you for not dodging any hard questions. I think,
Oh, thanks for having me.
yeah, yeah, I appreciate it, and I want people to understand that every negative outcome of a firearm will be used against us. The Second Amendment people that are listening. So I think it's up to us to police ourselves. It's up to us to look to technology, embrace it, own it, control our narrative, and really reach out to the rest of the world and say, like, this stuff is available and we back this stuff, and this is the stuff we recommend. And I truly believe that Safe Gun Lock is a great product, and I want everyone to go to safegunlock.com and check it out today. And where can people find it? Just on the website? And is it on Amazon? Is it
No, it's not on Amazon, but you
okay?
just go on the website and go to safegunlock.com, and they'll be able to grab it. And if you're a Virginia resident, there's a Virginia resident page, and you get it for free. And if you're part of some of these other states, encourage the similar program. And Safe Gun Lock kind of feels like, hey, we'd like for you to buy our gun lock, but in the same respect is, we want you to buy a gun lock and then use it, because that's the key, is to use it.
No, that's very noble. Love it. How can it's just social media links? I don't want to forget anything. I want people to be able to find you however it is.
There's link. I think it's on LinkedIn. I think it's on
Okay.
Facebook as well. Um, but yeah, no, there's LinkedIn. There's a Facebook. In fact, I think they're doing a Facebook campaign now where you can actually capture and get a hold of it. Just find it and like it and follow it and all those other social media things that you do.
Okay. Well, thanks again, Scott, for coming through today and having the tough discussions, and really appreciate it. It was very insightful in your perspective. So I want to thank the listeners for showing up and making this all possible, and everybody that is behind all the sponsors, everyone that has made guns and mental health not mutually exclusive anymore. And this is a discussion that we have on a weekly basis. And it's cool to talk about this stuff now. And you're seeing a culture shift. So I absolutely can't thank everyone enough. Until next time, we wish you all better mental wellness.
There we go. It stopped.
All right. How'd you feel about that? It's good.
Good. I thought it was great. Yeah. How'd you feel? I mean, that's the.
Hey, man, we talked for an